Well, welcome along. Hello, gentlemen. How are we?
All back together.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's cold in here as well, isn't it? That's why I've got a cardigan.
First moan of the day in the first 5 seconds.
Who had 5 seconds in the sweep?
Well, I think we all assumed in the summer that if City weren't going to win the Premier League title, it was probably going to be Arsenal who were front and centre to lift the trophy. Obviously, it's not happened. They've fallen short. Again, James, you're the one that watches them more than anyone. Where's it gone wrong, do you think, and what do they need to do to fix it?
Easy one to start. They started short. They didn't have enough last summer, and I think they relied on player availability being as optimum as it was the year before, when they could pick pretty much the vast majority of the same team every week, and they relied on getting the absolute maximum out of their two key players, Martin Odegaard and Bukayo Saka. And so when they went into this season and they didn't strengthen, and I know we're going to talk about signing a striker and strengthening that forward line, but when they opted not to do that and they looked at Benjamin Sesko, they did the work on him, he was the one that they wanted to go and sign. He then signed a new contract at Red Bull Leipzig, and they thought, okay, if the guy we want is not necessarily available, then we wait. And actually we scored 91 goals in the league. You know, it was a club record for them in the Premier League. We're confident we've got enough goals in the team and we can hit those levels with then the players that we have signed to make us kick on in other areas, then maybe we've got enough. And that was the mistake. The mistake they made was ultimately before a ball was kicked. And, you know, I've heard Arteta recently talk about how they were the best team in the Champions League despite getting knocked out, how all the stats say we should have won those 2 games against PSG, how, you know, nobody could have gone through what we've gone through and still be in second place. I just don't buy that. You know, they need more than they have. And this is a huge summer for them, particularly when you consider they have a new sporting director, you know, who's going to come in and is going to want to stamp his authority on it as well. And clearly, there's a lot of work to do, more than I think Mikel Arteta would let on.
Do a lot of his claims and justifications kind of ring a bit hollow when you compare him to Arne Slot, who's coming at Liverpool, hasn't added to his squad, basically worked with the squad that he had that was left to him by Jurgen Klopp, which didn't finish above Arsenal last season. And they've gone on to win the Premier League by a million miles, really, haven't they? They've won it by some distance. And Arsenal had a squad that was better than Liverpool's last year and they haven't kicked on. So to me, it seems that at times Arteta and Arsenal are almost like trying to get perfection. They're trying to fine-tune it so much that they're missing the bigger picture, that you just need, like you say, certain players in certain areas. Maybe be a bit less like the overbearing parent that he is and just give the team a bit more freedom and a bit more, just the ability to do things off the cuff. I just see something in Arsenal that doesn't strike me as a team or a setup that's built for winning.
Well, if you take the first 25, 30 minutes of that second leg against Paris Saint-Germain, they were really good. They were really good. And that is Arteta's sort of ultimate, template, really, is to control the game, have the team penned in, the opposition penned in their own box, ideally, but certainly in their own half. And, you know, pass, left to right, and then, you know, somebody makes the difference in the final third. The problem is they don't have enough difference makers in the final third, and they don't have a clinical goal scorer. I mean, I don't think it's as simple as saying sign a striker and then win the league, but they get a lot closer. I mean, everybody can see it, you know. And the fact is, when we all know this when we write these kind of pieces, you know, we talk about injury crisis, and Arsenal might have to put a midfielder up front, or Arteta's going to have to get creative this weekend. And then in the second part of your story, when you list the players who are injured, you go Gabriel Jesus, Kai Havertz.
Yeah,
that's it. There isn't anyone else.
And Gabriel Jesus doesn't do anything anyway.
Then you're into, Trossard can play in there, Martinelli can play in there. Obviously, Marino ended up playing in there for a while. But they're so obviously one short, and it is only one, but they need an elite one at the top of that list.
Do you not feel a bit of sympathy, though, for Arteta? Because you mentioned there the first, 20 minutes against PSG. Donnarumma's made 2 unbelievable saves in the first 20 minutes. Say Arsenal are 3-0 up in the second leg. They go through. We're sat here talking about potentially Arsenal winning the Champions League. Arteta's a fantastic coach, and look how far he's brought Arsenal from not even qualifying to actually winning it. And instead, Donnarumma plays out of his skin, and we started, potentially talking about Arsenal failing again. Is Arteta's job on the line? How close are they actually to winning anything? You're talking about really, really fine margins, not necessarily in the Premier League, because I think that gap's massive, but in terms of being successful and winning something significant.
They very rarely get outplayed, Arsenal. I'm at 90% of their games, and they do not. I can't think of many occasions where they've come out well beaten, and you've just thought, okay, they were just second best today, and Arteta's had to sort of admit that. I think they've drawn, is it 13 Premier League games this season? The differences are small, but they are consistently there, and they are consistently on the wrong side of them. And look, we're talking about the last step, the hardest step, going from consistent challenges to winning, and he has done a very good job. I don't think we can deny that. I don't think we should be quick to dismiss that, actually, from a cultural point of view, just how sort of toxic it was really when he took over, and he's turned them into a team that is absolutely determined to win, but he's just a bit short. It's not a rebuild. We're not talking about. I don't think Arteta needs to reinvent the wheel here. I just think they need a little bit more of what they're already doing.
The problem is, though, but we sat here on this podcast talking about if City were going to miss out, then it had to be Arsenal. It had to be Arsenal to take advantage. And now we're talking about Arsenal waiting for another season, and Liverpool are going to strengthen, City are going to be back, Chelsea are going to spend money, Newcastle are going to presumably have Champions League revenue to spend. You're talking about the gap potentially getting even bigger.
Well, and this is why January was so important, because they had an opportunity there. And I'm not saying Ollie Watkins wins you the league or the Champions League, but he gets you closer. Yeah. And that was a situation that was presented to them. Villa came and said, we want 60 million for Ollie Watkins. Now, I'm not saying he's necessarily worth that, but they thought he was worth 40 because they bid 40. So it then becomes a 20 million pound decision, maybe a 15 million pound decision if you can negotiate a little bit. Now, for 15 million quid, do we want to go for it and seize that opportunity that you're talking about? City have fallen away, the other teams are scrambling. We're right there with Liverpool, who we don't know at that point whether they can last the distance. We don't know whether Arne Slot can see it out. They've still got 5-6 months to go. Do we go for it? They decided not to, and they are very proud of how strategic they are in the market. They like the fact that they plan their windows 2-3 windows out, but ultimately they didn't gamble enough, and that has cost them. And only time will tell how much that has cost them, because there have been teams in the past. You think of Pochettino Spurs, or Harry Redknapp Spurs, for example, going back 10-12 years when they were top of the league in January, and he wanted. I always remember this, when he wanted Carlos Tevez and Gary Cahill, and he got Ryan Nelson and Louis Saha, and that was the compromise that Spurs made, and they didn't win. They didn't kick on, and they didn't win the league. And this is a bit similar to that, is that they had the opportunity there to go and sign 29-year-old proven Premier League goal scorer, who, by the way, is a boyhood Arsenal fan. Fit, could have come straight in and done a job. Has played in the Champions League. Is proven at the highest level. Played for England. Scored in a European Championship semi-final. And they didn't do it.
But the counter to all that is, and we have to say that Arsenal beat Real Madrid over 2 legs in both games. They beat the European champions. Everyone was saying before the game, me, you, everybody, it's Real Madrid, it's the Bernabeu, they're not going to do it, they haven't got the experience, and they did it. So, was it 5-1 on aggregate?
Yeah.
So basically, they've beaten Real Madrid. Did Arsenal and their fans maybe get a little bit giddy with that, thinking that they've arrived now, they've beaten Real Madrid? Because I must admit, going to the PSG game, it did feel like it was PSG, we'll get to the final, we're going to win the Champions League for the first time. Beating Real Madrid has maybe given them a false sense of growth, a false sense of where they are.
I think Real Madrid's history in the competition, they're just the team sheet alone kind of makes it feel as though any opposition you play beyond that feels like a bit of a step down. So therefore it should be easier in theory. So maybe there was a bit of that. But I do think, people are judging Arsenal against their own history, and obviously City and Liverpool who are winning things. I think if you talk to Arteta about it, he would sort of say, well, actually, we're coming from a different place. We're coming from a low base, and actually going from, it's the first semi-final since 2009. It's a long time, 16 years, to get to that stage. So they, in that sense, feel that there's another step forward, that they are. I think if he continues to try and argue they're one of the best 4 teams in Europe, then this is when he's going to start making himself look a bit silly.
But teams have to miss out, don't they? Over history, teams have gone close and made the breakthrough. PSG got to the final, the semi-finals last year, lost. They got to the final this time, and the Man United team under Ferguson went close and close. Even City under Pep, they went close and close before making the breakthrough. It's just that Arsenal seem to be at that point now where the breakthrough should have been 12 months ago, really.
And Yeah, I agree. And I think part of the problem is that I'm not sure Arteta is quite clear in how he wants to take that final step. I always remember in a presser about 18 months ago that he was talking about how he wanted Pep style, a kind of streamed down 19, 20-man squad to work with, which, sprinkling the youngsters around that. And he wanted that tight group, concentrate on keeping them fit, consistency of selection, and that's how we work. And then more recently, he's talked about, with the number of games we've got now, maybe the Premier League needs to look at expanding the 25-man squads, and we need to start thinking about 28 or maybe even 30-man squads. And I think, we forget maybe that this is his first managerial role. He's still a young manager. He's still feeling his way into it to some extent. I'm talking at the very highest level now, at winning things. He's coming up against proven winners in the Champions League and obviously in the Premier League in Pep. And I think he's just not quite sure how to take that final step. And this is why this summer is really important, because I think Andrea Berta is somebody who the club are looking at to say, you can get us there. You know what we need. So these two need to work together and be proactive in the market.
I don't think there's much from the club, is there, about Arteta's position, about whether it's in doubt or anything. But there is murmurings among some fans. I'm not suggesting that it's widespread, but there is bits from fans suggesting that Arteta's he's had enough time. He's had years to make the breakthrough when he's the guy that can't get them over the line and they need to kind of look to move him on. Do you have sympathy with those Arsenal fans? Do you think there's a valid point there, or is it just frustrated fans kind of throwing the toys out of the pram a little bit?
I don't sense that is true in the stadiums. I don't feel it at the Emirates. I certainly don't see it among the away fans. They tend to sing his name a lot still during games. I think we're talking probably about a few people on social media, and how much credence do we really give to that? However, if they don't go and do what they need to do in the summer, and they don't start particularly well next season, and let's say City are back to the sort of traditional level, or Liverpool kick on again, or they suddenly sort of find themselves at kind of 8-10 points off the pace come Christmas time, there will start to be some murmurings. I don't think Arsenal will sack him under almost any circumstance next season. I just can't, unless it's a complete capitulation. I just can't see it. If you look at the squad profile, the ages are all right in terms of looking as though they're going to improve and kick on again. If they add the 2 or 3 they need, then they should be bang there. But he will be under more pressure. But I just totally dismiss the idea that he could lose his job in the next 12 months.
But at what point does somebody at the club think, yeah, we've made progress, but Arsenal are there to win things? I mean, what is it, 4 FA Cups since the Invincibles in 2004. So that's not in keeping with Arsenal's history. I think this is the longest they've ever gone without winning the league, 21 years. And, they're a big, big club. At some point, he's going to have to win something. He's going to have to make that breakthrough. And I guess if he has a bad summer or a good summer, it makes no difference to the point that he has to win something next year. Can you see us sitting here in 12 months' time and they haven't won anything? How the pitch will look, no matter what's happened during the season. If they don't win something next year, how does he justify that? How does he kind of say, I'm still the man for the future?
Because we could be talking about a team that loses the Premier League on the final day. We could be talking about a team that gets to the Champions League final and loses. We could be talking about...
But it's losing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you've got to win. They haven't... I mean, I can't... When was the last time they won the League Cup? That was pre-Wenger years, wasn't it? Arsenal don't win enough for the size of the club. And at some point, they have to change that. Man United have been terrible for 10, 12 years, and they've won, 4 or 5 major trophies. Liverpool had a bad period between Benitez and Klopp. And they...
Okay, but would you rather be Arsenal or Man United right now?
Yeah, but that question, though, I've heard this question asked about if Spurs win the Europa League, who's had the best season? Now, obviously, look at the table, it's Arsenal. But in 10 years' time, when you look back, and if Spurs win the trophy, this season will be better for Tottenham than Arsenal, because who remembers when finishing second or third? It's about winning trophies. It's about winning things.
But that's the wrong context. The context is for Tottenham, they haven't won a trophy for 17 years.
Exactly.
It's a totally different situation.
Yeah,
Arsenal have been eyeing... They're not interested in it, rightly or wrongly. They wouldn't be interested in trying to win the Europa League. I mean, obviously, if they're in it, they'd have a go. But they have been trying to build a team. Arteta's always talked about this 5-phase plan. That they, at the end of that, is that they are winning the Premier League and they're winning the Champions League.
Poch had that outlook.
Those are the prizes they go for.
Tottenham under Poch never looked at the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. Didn't treat them seriously, and it was like they got a focus on the big competition, but they didn't win anything. And you look back at that team, you mentioned it before, that Tottenham team didn't quite go to where it should have done. Now, Arsenal might be in that same position because they lost the Carabao Cup semi-final to Newcastle, as you say. They lost to PSG in the semi-final of the Champions League. I just think he needs to win something to maintain that credibility that he's the guy to take them forward. Because maybe there's a coach out there that can just be the guy that takes them to the next level. Maybe he's not an elite coach to the point where he's not a Tuchel, he's not a Klopp, he's not a Guardiola. Maybe he just isn't. Maybe he's the guy that takes them from there to there, and they need somebody else to go from that next level.
The problem is, though, they've progressed beyond the FA Cup and the League Cup, haven't they? And you talk about context, that United haven't got anywhere near winning the Premier League title. Obviously, Spurs haven't. So the FA Cup and the League Cup become more important. Arsenal, have progressed beyond that. So now you're looking at 2 trophies generally that can they can justify winning,
but
which is the Premier League and the Champions League.
If you win one of those, it just stops the noise. You can't.
What happens next year if he finishes 4th and wins the League Cup? Genuinely,
I think that's a better season than this season because you qualify for the Champions League and you got a trophy.
But they wouldn't view it like that.
Yeah, but that's the problem with football these days, isn't it? It's all about balance sheets. And it's not about the glory of winning something. It's just clubs that win something. The clubs are there for a reason, aren't they? They're not there to make money, they're there to win things for the fans.
But to some extent, he's a victim of his own narrative because you can't talk about an overhaul of culture. You can't spend hundreds of millions of pounds as they have. Let's not forget, this doesn't come cheap, what they're doing here. And they will spend, I don't think they're going to spend massive amounts, but they will spend probably considerably in the summer again. You can't talk about journeys and 5-phase plans and cultural changes and things, and then deliver a League Cup and go, there you go.
Yeah, but it's a building block, isn't it? The culture at the minute is what.
But they're past the point of the building block.
Yeah, but
they're past the point of that.
They got rid of the toxic culture, but then the cultures of one of making excuses, or pretending that they're the best team of the Champions League, or pretending that Liverpool don't deserve to win the title this year because Arsenal are better than the last 2 years. It's like, that's not a good culture for me. That's a culture of blaming other people, not looking at yourself.
Yeah, I have to say that this is the first time, the last sort of month or so, since it's obviously become clear that Liverpool were going to win the league, then they've won the league, and Arsenal have gone out of the Champions League. This is the first time I've started to think that Arteta's not quite got his messaging right in terms of striking that balance between wanting to protect the group that he got, but admitting the obvious shortcomings that we can all see. And I think he's struggling with that at the moment. I think he's got this mentality of, I just defend my players, siege mentality, we us against the world type thing. When actually, objectively, and it's not a criticism of him or the group, that they can't rectify, they just need a bit more. They're going to sign Martin Zubimendi from Real Sociedad. That will happen. So that kind of strengthens that midfield, that they're going to lose Jorginho. We don't know what's going to happen with Thomas Partey. There's potential a new contract there, but even if there isn't, Zubimendi at least strengthens the numbers in that position. They're going to go and try and get a number 9, and I think they need another wide player as well. I think they still, we're talking about structure and control of matches. Well, if you need someone to go and do something a bit different, then they need more than Saka to go and deliver that, because Martinelli's not kicked on, Trossard's not consistent enough. He could be anything, but he's only 18.
Just on Saka, Saka is their best player. He's the jewel in the crown, isn't he? He's such a good player in the sense that he turns up on the biggest occasions against the biggest teams. Now, how long will he put up with trajectory and progression? He wants to win something, doesn't he?
I wouldn't be worried. Saka and Saliba have both got 2 years left on their deals. I wouldn't be worried about Saka at all. Saliba would be the one that might concern me, because I think the Real Madrid sort of machine, we all know how it works over there. It's starting to kind of whir into motion, isn't it? And I actually put it to Mikel the other week like that. I said, look, we're getting these noises from Madrid. The sort of Spanish press is starting to whip up this idea that he might want to move and the club might look for him. And we all know how it works. But this is your opportunity to just say he's not going anywhere. And he didn't say that. He said,
probably knows he can't.
From what I know from speaking to William directly, he's happy here, but it's one for Andrea, it's one for the club. That's the one that would concern me.
So how do they deal with that then? If you're Andrea Berta now, do you think, right, we'll try next year, but if you get to the final year of his contract, then you've got a problem. Now it's almost like this summer is, I won't say it's make or break, obviously, but it's a big, big summer, because you need to decide now, either keep him, sign him down. If you don't sign a contract, then they've got a problem.
Yeah, they won't sell him. I don't think they would sell him under any circumstances this summer. Unless, of course, he decides to push really hard for a move and go on strike or hand in a transfer request, all that sort of stuff. But I don't see that happening as we sit here now. I think it would be one that they will look to tie down as early as possible because of the message it sends to the new signings and the rest of the squad. I mean, they'll hope that Saka will send that message, I think, because they feel pretty confident about that one. But, neither of these players are going to come cheap. They are two of the best players in Europe at a very good age. They deserve and demand top dollar.
Saka can be the guy that leads this team to where it needs to be by showing that commitment.
Well, he's the one. In the piece that we're sort of talking about that we put out last week, that they need somebody to go to Salah levels. The last 3 seasons, the top goal scorer in the Premier League has played for the champions. Erling Haaland twice, and Mohamed Salah, we assume, is going to win it this year. Now, that isn't a sort of gotcha by itself, but it does suggest that the team that wins the title needs a player who just goes above and beyond. And the last player to score 25 league goals in a season for Arsenal was Thierry Henry in 2004-05. So it's been 20 years since an Arsenal player scored that many goals. And Saka's the one you look at in the squad at the moment and you think, all right, slightly augmented by the fact that he takes penalties, but he's the one who could get them there. He could get to 25 goals if he's fit and he's a bit more ruthless and selfish in the final third because he's such a nice guy. He tends to, maybe he needs to have a bit more of a meaner streak in him, but he's the only one I could see who could get there unless you go after an Isak or a Gyökeres or...
Actually, that's one of the reasons why they haven't pushed to sign a striker as much as they should have. That 22-23 campaign where they had... I'm just looking at the stats. Martinelli got 15 in the league. Odegaard got 15 in the league. Saka got 14 in the league. That Arteta had this idea that you share all the goals around and we'll get these kind of numbers from these players again and again and again. And just completely misjudged that the likes of Martinelli and Odegaard in particular just aren't going to be able to consistently hit 15 and 20 Premier League goals.
Nobody's got 10 for Arsenal in the league this season.
Well, Man United made that mistake with it. Rashford, Martial and Greenwood scored over 50 league goals between one season. That was, they're the future and look where they are now. And, I think Martinelli is probably similar to Anthony Martial in that respect, that he's not quite at the level that you want him to be to kick on, but Saka is. I know I take your point on Saka, and I think you're right in the sense that homegrown player, London boy, he's Arsenal through and through, but you'd be looking at people like Lamine Yamal and Desiree Doué and Dembele at PSG thinking, these guys could be winning the Champions League, and he is a player that could play for Barcelona and Real Madrid. He really is, and that's why I'd be a bit cautious if I was Arsenal that you've just got to give him whatever he wants, give him a 5-year contract, make him the Salah money, because he is that good, and you have to have. He's the poster boy, isn't he, of the club, that if he shows the commitment, if you back him, it shows Arsenal mean business, because he's such a good player that every club in Europe would want to take him away.
Yeah, yes. But as I say, I really don't think Saka's the problem. I think that they will be able to commit him to a new deal. The only thing, I mean, there is a little bit of a bit of background on this, that Saka's agent was also the agent that did the Chido Obi Martin deal to Manchester United.
He won't go Man United.
I know, no, but there was a bit of. I'm not suggesting. Before we clip that up, I'm not suggesting that for a minute. But I think there was a bit of friction between the agency and the club from the fallout of that deal, the Chido deal. Now, who knows? I suppose the key factor is that Edu's no longer there, so the fact that Andrea Berta comes in probably means it's a clean slate, but whether there's any lingering sort of issue between that agency and the club when they come to sit down to talk about Saka, we'll have to wait and see.
If they want to use it as a wedge, I'm sure they'll use it, but I think Saka will drive that one, don't you?
Yeah.
One final one then before we move on. You look into your crystal ball, what kind of season do Arsenal have next year? And do they win the Premier League? Easy one to finish.
Well, I don't think that Liverpool are guaranteed to kick on in the same way that once City kind of got there, you thought, okay, they're just serious contenders now for the next sort of 5 years, and probably the team to beat for that long. That is not to say that Liverpool can't win the league again next year. Of course they can. But I don't think their rivals will be looking at them thinking, okay, the bar's been raised here to a new level and we've got to go again. I think that, Arsenal, City, Chelsea to some extent, if they can get their act together, will look at them and think, they're there to be shot at next year. Will Salah have the same kind of year he's had this year? Will Van Dijk be available for every single minute as he has been in the league this season? I think if Arsenal are proactive in the market, they start with a favourites chance of winning the title next year. But they have to sign Zubimendi, a striker, and probably a wide player as well for that to be true.
Well, it's time for a break. When we come back, we'll be looking at our favourite memories of Goodison Park with Don Hutchison.
Sunday marks the end for the grand old lady of English football as Everton say farewell to Goodison Park. It was the first purpose-built football stadium. It's the ground that's hosted more top-flight games than any other, and it hosted a World Cup semi-final in 1966. When the final whistle blows against Southampton on Sunday, it will signal the end of an era for Everton Football Club. Joining us to talk about his memories of the ground is ex-Everton captain, now TV and radio pundit, including for ESPN, Don Hutchison. Welcome, Don.
Afternoon, boys. How are we?
Yeah, very good, very good. So kick off with a nice easy one. We've seen some quotes attributed to you recently that Goodison was 10 times the atmosphere of that of Anfield. So can you just defend that for us, please?
That got twisted slightly. It was in a Merseyside derby, which was the better atmosphere, Anfield or Goodison. So I went with Goodison because I just think it's more emotive. I think it's very emotional. I think 99, and I'm sort of guessing here, but I get the feeling that 99% of the fans live really close to Goodison, so it makes it really atmospheric. We saw in the last game at Goodison where Tarkowski scored, it was just off the charts loud on the Richter scale, and I just get that feeling it is. There's no bias there. I haven't played for both sides, but I just get the feeling when the Merseyside derbies are at Goodison, it's that little bit louder.
It also, I've been to Goodison quite a bit over the years, and one thing that certainly in the recent years when they've struggled a little bit, the atmosphere is fantastic, but it's also it can be quite an angry ground, can't it? In terms of if it doesn't go for Everton the first 10, 15 minutes, it can turn quite quickly. So as passionate as it is it a difficult place to play when things aren't going well?
No, I wouldn't say. I get your point. I do take your point because they're so emotional. They do wear their heart on the sleeves, the Everton fans, and they do let you know when you're not playing well. But I think if you're a good pro, I think you've got anything about you. I think you can respond. I think you can use that. I certainly did, even when, we went through a couple of bad seasons where we nearly got relegated when we stayed up against Coventry on the last day of the season. I just think that's part and parcel of fans really caring for their football club, and I think you've got to embrace that.
What's it like in the tunnel, Don? Because the one thing that always gets me at Goodison, pre-match, the atmosphere, they really, really build it up. But when they start playing, to listeners who aren't aware, Zed Kaz is Everton's walk on tune, but it seems to be the most emotive and stirring atmosphere any ground when that starts playing.
It's that and the siren. I think it's the siren that gets to me. Everyone's got the sort of walkout music, if you like. Everyone sort of does it in the Premier League now, and it's brilliant. But I think it's the siren which is just completely different. It just sort of gets you going. It gets the juices going. The adrenaline gets you going. And when you're in that tunnel, I've been there, quite a few times, lucky enough to captain the club, and I've stood there with Jamie Redknapp, who was captain of Liverpool at the time. And you're literally touch tight to people. So you can either have a conversation or you can blank your mates, or you just, you can't get away from them because they're literally touch tight. They're shoulder to shoulder. There's no room to breathe, and then you hear that siren. It makes you so pumped when you chuck left towards the Gladys Street end. It's amazing.
Must have kicked off a few times in that tunnel, didn't it?
Once or twice, more so on the way in at half time and more so after games. The tunnel was always pretty edgy and pretty spicy before games, but nothing ever really sort of kicked off then. But you've had some rows and had some fights after the games when you're making your way back up the tunnel.
Don, before we get into your sort of favourite memories of Goodison, obviously there's going to be a lot of Everton fans on Sunday who are quite sad to be leaving Goodison. They probably spent a majority of their lives watching football games there. Was it a case that Everton just had to leave? Is this the best move, do you think, for the football club? As sad as it's going to be to leave a famous old stadium behind.
Yeah, I think without knowing the logistics, because I'm a Newcastle fan and I never want to see St James's Park move, even though they are talking about moving the site 100 yards to the left behind the Leazes end, and it's the same as Anfield, same at Goodison. I've always of the opinion if you can make it bigger, but it's difficult in that area with all the houses connected to Goodison. There's a fantastic story and a guy called Ray Parr who bought a house on Goodison Road, which is just next to the reception. So next time if you're up at Goodison at the weekend, there's a row of houses, all right touching each other. A row of houses, about 100 of them. And a guy called Ray Parr bought one of the houses just because he could afford it, and he's turned it into a bar. So on a match day, the fans actually go into a house, but it's actually a bar. And Howard Kendall used to go in there before games, and Peter Reid and some of the managers would pop into the house because the guy could afford it. He turned it into a sort of bar before the game and after the game. So it is pretty amazing. It's pretty unique. So I get the feeling they would have looked into making Goodison bigger, but I just think the logistics of it probably meant as though they had to move away.
Rob, is there anything planned in the Man United stadium like that?
If we reduce to that, when there's no money left, it'll just be a little man with a house in a terraced house outside Old Trafford.
Don, have you been down to the new place yet, the new stadium on the river?
I've not been down there yet, but just going back on that, you might have seen Liam Delap when he was in a house the other day. I don't know if you've seen him when he was in. That was actually the house that he went in and just signed a few autographs. I've not been there yet. I'm gagging to go. Everton have been very kind and they've donated a brick to all their former players, which got up a nice little message on there. So once that gets laid in the ground, I think we're all going to go up there. I'll take the family up there and go and see it. But it's meant to be spectacular. I know a few guys that have been there and been on site, and it sounds pretty amazing.
You mentioned the Coventry game before, Don. Is that the game that stands out most to you? The game that basically is it Gareth Farrelly who scored the goal that day to keep you up? I know they went very close to being relegated a few years before when Graham Stewart scored the goal against Wimbledon, but that was your kind of near miss, wasn't it?
It's my favourite memory, not so much for the game, because I was really close to Howard Kendall, who I really missed dearly. And he was in his third spell at Everton, and he was, after the game, the team and the management and the staff, they're all celebrating, popping champagne, which is always a bit of a debate. I just think some people think it's unnecessary when you just stayed up, but it's just emotions, it's just relief. And I asked Edgar Heath, number 2, where's the gaffer? And he said he's in the boot room, which is the first left. And people always say to you, what's your best memory of football? Where, if you could go back for a minute, where would you go? And I go back into the boot room when I knocked on the door and Howard Kendall was sitting there in the dark. And I opened the door and he was just sat in a seat and he was crying because he was so relieved because he didn't want to be the man that took Everton down. And I can remember opening the door and I walked in, I hugged him, and the two of us just stayed in the dark and he was just crying on my shoulder and I was really emotional. And we both just stayed there. It felt like about 10 minutes. It was probably only about 30 seconds, but it was the best 30 seconds of my life just staying with the gaffer because he was so relieved because Everton made so much to him. He didn't want to be the man that took them down. It would have been terrible for him.
When I'm looking back, I was asked to what memories stand out for me, and I think you probably left just before Wayne Rooney came through. But my memories, I was at Wayne's debut for Everton against Tottenham in 2002, and he was only 16. And it was like, just the way he played, he was so mature. He wasn't playing as a centre forward per se, but he held the ball up in a way that he looked like a 26-year-old rather than a 16-year-old. You could tell on that day, the very first day, that Wayne Rooney was going to be an absolute superstar, and he was 16, and he just looked like a grown man. I mean, was he there as a kid when you were there, Don?
He was, and I think the best thing about Everton at the time, and Liverpool had it for a period of time, but then Liverpool moved away with their youngsters went and trained elsewhere. But Belfield was a place where, and I think Howard sort of started it, and Walter Smith carried it on for a while, where the younger players would train at Belfield so they could get close and get touch tight to the guys. You know, it's always one of these when you're a young player, you look and you see the boys training or the men training, and you want to be where they are, and it's like you're so close to them. And I think that's a sad thing that's been lost in the game where, 17s or 18s or 21s could be training on the very next pitch to the first team and watching them and watching their heroes. And I think Wayne was a very, very young boy coming through. As you say, he looked like a man. The goal against David Seaman was just iconic. And I think that was one of the best things that Everton built over the years at Belfield was that relationship from the very younger players and the younger coaches to be touch tight to the likes of Howard Kendall or Walter Smith and the coaching staff. Sad that that's lost.
Favourite memories, guys? James?
Well, when Don's talking about obviously how tight the tunnel is, the mix zone, which is where the journalists wait to speak to the players, is literally next door to the away dressing room, and it's quite rare. It's quite hard to explain to listeners, but basically the modern stadiums, everything is sort of separated out, and essentially they try and put as many doors and barriers between us and the inner sanctums of the stadiums as they can. So it's quite rare to go to a ground where, particularly obviously a big Premier League ground, where you can stand 2 meters away from. There's literally a small kind of penned area and then a doorway, and the other side of that doorway is the away dressing room. And I remember going up there to do a game. It's probably about 10 years ago now, and there'd been a sending off late in the game, and we got straight down into the mix zone afterwards, and I could hear the Everton players and the opposition players arguing about the red card. And it got a bit shouty, and you could hear people being separated, and then it kind of dissipated. And about 15, 20 minutes later, one of the players came out from the opposition team and come and did an interview with me. And I said, have you had a chance to sort of reflect on the red card and, maybe talk to the opposition about it? And he went, no, we've not been able to see him. And I sort of thought, well, I could hear it. There was next to it. I could hear it. But of course, they're not used to a lot of these kind of players are not used to that proximity. So it's, we sadly missed that from.
When you talk about the press box, like we can talk about your personal hell in the press box, because we have to tell that James is quite tall, and the Everton press box is probably the tightest press box anywhere. I mean, it's one of those places where once you're in, you're in. And the only thing all you do is get up for half time for the sausage rolls in the press room, because the Everton sausage rolls are pretty legendary. To be honest,
can't do that.
But you can't get out because it's very, very tight, and that will not be missed when they go to the new stadium, will it?
No, but I don't imagine they're going to give me a brick to put into the new stadium to sort of reference this. I don't think.
I did wonder where Don was going when he said they were giving them a brick. I thought that was a little bit edgy at first. But what's your message going to be on the brick, Don? If you have to put a message on it, what will it be?
You sort of had so many sort of bit like a text actually, a bit like a tweet actually. You only had so many characters you could fit on a brick. So I just said former captain Nil Satis Nisi Optimum, which is obviously Latin for nothing but the best, and the Everton crest on there. But my relationship and my first memory of Goodison goes all the way back to when I was a teenager, when I signed for Liverpool, and the famous 4-4 draw in the cup when Kenny resigned days later. That's when I went there to watch that 4-4 in the main stand, right at the top, right at the very back. And it was like watching down and literally watching down on your feet. You're watching the pitch. So that's where my memories sort of first came from, watching those Merseyside derbies as a kid, trying to break into the Liverpool team.
I mean, it's a bit of a cliche and David Moyes kind of called them the People's Club. But you've played for both clubs in Liverpool. I suppose you've got affections for both. But there is something special about Everton. It does have an effect on former players I don't get with other players. I speak to a lot of players who used to play for Everton. It is always the first club they look for.
Yeah. I just think because it's so emotional, and I think lots of people fly in all over the world to watch Premier League games, but I never get the feeling that, and there obviously is going to be a few, but it doesn't seem many when you walk out of Goodison and you're playing there. It never feels as though anyone in the stadium's born within 5 miles away. It's almost like they're all really close to the stadium, so it really matters to them, and they wear their heart on their sleeve. And what you've got to remember, generations and generations. I heard Duncan Ferguson talk about it the other day, which was pretty deep, but he was bang on, and he was sort of saying, well, people have had their ashes laid behind the goal, behind the Gladys Street end, and it's a family thing that's been generated over 100 and odd years, and it's like you can't put your finger on why, because everyone sort of says when you play for Everton, the touches is slightly different, and it feels a bit cringy sort of saying it, but it sort of does, because I think every single game that you play, there's no dead rubbers. You've got to perform because the fans will let you know if you're not. You've got to put a shift in. That's the first thing you have to do. You can't swan around the place thinking you're the big I am. So you've got to play like it matters. You've got to play like you're a fan of Everton. And I think that's why the atmospheres are so good. And I think that's why when players leave, they can say, like me, the biggest club I've ever played for is Liverpool. Absolutely it is. But the thing, I think I went to Everton at exactly the right time when I was more mature, when I'd been to Liverpool and I'd been down to London, and I went to Sheffield and Howard Kendall took me there, and I went there as a more mature person. I went there when I was sort of 26, 27, so I was more mature and I could handle it. And then you get the armband, and then you really realise you're playing for a massive club. And my story's there for 3 or 4 years, but you imagine the guys in the 80s that were winning Premier Leagues and winning European trophies. It's amazing, and it's got a great history, very rich.
Speaking of swanning around like the big I am, I want to ask you about Trent Alexander-Arnold before we go. What have you made of the last few days of that? Obviously, we don't know officially he's going to Real Madrid, but he probably is. He's obviously announced he's leaving, and he got booed when he came on against Arsenal on Sunday. What's your view of that whole situation? Do you think he's sort of tarnished his legacy there at the club with the way he's gone about this?
Like, to be honest, I didn't like it. I thought it was very unnecessary. I didn't think it was a good look for the football club that their fans were booing one of their players. The only thing I can say, and I might be wildly off the mark, is I hope Liverpool fans have got it out of the system and they sing his name against Crystal Palace on the last day of the season. Trent's born, in West Derby, around the corner from the training ground. I just don't get why Liverpool fans would boo. I think if you're going to do anything, maybe it's just not say anything. Maybe sing Steven Gerrard's name if you really want to, if you want to use that as a way of having a little dig. But I looked at Trent the week before when Liverpool won the title and all the players were lined up in front of the Kop and everyone was singing You'll Never Walk Alone. And the cameras panned on him and he was crying. His eyes were full and tears were streaming down his face because he loves Liverpool. It's just a young kid. And I think Liverpool fans, it would be like me if I'm born in Gateshead and I talk about Paul Gascoigne because he's from Gateshead, same part of the world as me. I would champion any player that's been born at Gateshead and went on and done well. And I'd like to think that Liverpool fans should be doing the same for a guy and a kid that was born in West Derby who's been at the club for 20 years, never knowing if he was ever going to make the first team. And he did. And he was a superstar. And he's won the absolute lot. You know, I don't get why they boo just because they say, well, we'll not get the transfer fee. I mean, when's Trent ever turned out to be an accountant? He's just a footballer that wants to live out his dream, play for his boyhood football club, which is Liverpool. He'll still think they're the best club in the world, but he wants to try Real Madrid. He just wants to try it. It might work for him, it might not. But I just think you're burning your bridges if you boo him and just send him off with a bit of class. That's what I think.
Well, I mean, this is a slightly different scenario, but I know that you've been booed in the past. I think you played for Millwall as a former West Ham player, so understandable. But what's it like when you're being booed by your own fans?
It's totally different because I shouldn't have made that move. I made that move because I wanted to stay local because I was going through a divorce and I wanted to stay local and I wanted to play for a football club that was in the area. So it was Millwall. But looking back, it was this ridiculous move going from West Ham to Millwall. I mean, it deserved all the boos that I got. Ridiculous. And 6 months later, I got sent to Coventry, literally. But I think it must be hard for Trent. I think if you sat down with it, if you're a mate at Trent and you're sitting down in the afternoon and you're asking him the question and you're talking about it, I bet he'd be close to tears, you know. I bet he'd be really, really upset how he got Trent. And I don't get it's a two-way street. I don't get that because Trent, as I said before, is just a young kid living out his dream, playing for Liverpool, and he wants to try something different. It's not like he's gone to Man United. That would be the comparison. Or he's gone to Everton. You know, my comparison from West Ham to Millwall would be like Trent going to Liverpool to Man United. Then you could probably understand it. Then you go, oh, well, actually, overstepped the mark there. Probably deserves a few boos. This one just feels a bit insensitive.
Well, Trent's trying something different. Everton are trying something different with a new stadium. Thanks for joining us, Don, and really appreciate your time. Manchester City head into this weekend's FA Cup final against Crystal Palace in a little bit of a difficult moment. They put in a lifeless performance against Southampton at the weekend, and that was after Erling Haaland questioned the team's hunger in an interview with ESPN.
For you, overall, how would you rate the season so far? Because we know you're so used to just winning multiple things, but this time, you know, I've spoken to Rico Lewis, spoken to Gundogan, spoken to Bernardo Silva as well, and they said this is a different season where you guys really had to reflect on yourselves a lot.
Yeah, and you know, this is also City can thank themselves for having so high standards, you know, winning so much in the last years, even before I came. And yeah, it hasn't been good enough. We haven't been there up fighting in Champions League or the Premier League, and that's not good enough for a club like City. You should be there, you should compete, but we haven't. So now if we can finish strong in Premier League and then win the FA Cup, that would be a really good thing. So I'll do everything I can to make it happen.
Well, ups and downs are normal. It is football, of course, and the Premier League is so competitive. But would you put it down to what felt different, I suppose, a little bit this season?
Of course, you can find excuses and all of this, injuries, many injuries at bad timings and all of this. But in the end, we haven't been performing well enough. We haven't had the fully hunger inside of us. And it's not. I haven't been good enough. I haven't helped the team enough. And in the end, we haven't been good enough winning games in a row, you know, and that's what we need to do. We have to get better and we have to get ready for first now, think of the next game, finish strong in the Premier League and win the FA Cup, and then we have to start focusing on the next season straight away.
Well, it's interesting that you say that about the hunger, because that's something a couple of the other players said as well. Is that just a natural thing that we on the outside need to understand when you perform at such a high level and win constantly, that it's natural to experience a little dip? I
think so. You cannot win every year. And again, what I just said, the club has set the standard, so the bar so high that this season is a catastrophic season. You know, that just says it all. Next season we have to find something inside our stomach again to attack the season.
Rob, what is going on at City at the moment? Do we read more into Southampton 0, Man City 0 than maybe we should, or is there a little bit of an issue behind the scenes maybe?
No, I mean, I think the sense I get at City is that they're just desperately trying to get to the end of the season.
Because it's 2 months away.
Well, yeah. Because it's been miserable. There's no point in any positive spin on it. I mean, all the interviews before the FA Cup semi-final and the final have been, is the FA Cup going to save your season? Is qualifying for the Champions League going to save it? And every time everyone said no. Players, Guardiola, everyone. You can even see a little bit in Pep's tactics. he started to play this kind of like this box midfield, which obviously he doesn't really want to do, but he's trying to get more control just to see them through to the end of the season, get into the Champions League, hopefully win the FA Cup, get to the summer, well, after the Club World Cup, obviously, get to the summer, sign some players, hopefully get some players back fit and start again next season. That's the sense I get, that they're just really just limping towards the end of the season. It's just a season that everyone wants to forget as quickly as possible.
I think as well the Ruben Dias quotes after the game at Southampton, which I thought were ridiculous, when he basically blamed Southampton for the way they played and said it's not good for the show and teams shouldn't play like this. Well, I think that kind of exposed a bit of the tensions at City as well, because Dias is basically saying that they didn't beat the worst team in the Premier League this season because they defended. Well, you're Man City. You should be finding a way to beat them.
Well, I think the argument was they didn't play football. Well, the point is that they can't play football. They're bottom of the league.
Yeah, but he's a defender. He should actually acknowledge the value of defending well, and they defended, and he's blaming the pitch. And I think looking for all these excuses is a way of deflecting the blame from themselves that they haven't performed.
I think the Haaland quote is interesting because all season Pep has been asked about why has it gone wrong, what's happened, and he's talked about injuries, he's talked about players having dips in form, Phil Foden, Bernardo Silva, all of these kind of factors that have impacted the form. The one thing that he's refused to say really is that the players have lost their hunger and desire and motivation. Now, we spoke to Gundogan before the FA Cup semi-final, and he suggested that maybe that the kind of the fight and the desire had been missing a little bit. And obviously Erling has come out and said it flat out. When it was put to Pep in his press conference, Guardiola seemed a little bit annoyed at that. He kind of like took a little minute to answer and sort of said, well, if the players feel like that, then they need to go and speak about it themselves and sort it out in the dressing room, as if to say, that's a major problem. That's not a problem that I've noticed, but if they think that, they need to solve it. He looked really irked.
I don't think it's a hunger thing. I just think, look, I mean, over the years, you've had the great teams, the Liverpool team in the 80s, the Man United team under Ferguson, who won 3 successive titles twice. Eventually, it comes to an end, doesn't it? You can't keep going to the top of the mountain. City's done it 4 times now, the 4 times the league title on the row, and that's never been done before. I just think they've come to an inevitable point where they just haven't got any more to give. They need a season to reset, and also they're quite an old team. Gundogan, Bernardo Silva, John Stones, who never plays, Kevin De Bruyne. There's lots of players in that team who are at the wrong side of 30 who, let's be honest, have given incredible service to City over the years. And maybe they just haven't got any more to give. Maybe they've come to the end of the road and Pep hasn't noticed it. Pep hasn't dealt with it, because I think the last 2 summer windows, they've kind of taken the foot off the gas. And Pep and Chiki Berghuis, the director of football, maybe it's their fault. Maybe they haven't changed when they had to. Maybe Pep was too loyal to the treble-winning team. And it's not the players' fault. It's Pep
I think that's what it is.
Refreshed at the right time.
The loyalty to the treble-winning team, that he was loyal to them in the summer when he could have refreshed and then signed younger players. When it was going really poorly in December and January, he could have dropped a few of those older players, and I think he thought in his head, these are players have got me out of trouble in the past, they're going to do it again, and they haven't. And just recently he started to play Nico O'Reilly a bit more, James McAtee a bit more, and he actually said in press conferences that he should have done that earlier, that maybe he was too loyal to the players who have won so much for him, and he couldn't get out of his head that these players were just not performing or couldn't reach the levels that they'd done so often again and again and again. They just couldn't he was a bit blinkered, I think, when he looked at the likes of Foden, Bernardo, Kyle Walker before he left, Edison to a certain extent. That he just didn't want to make those changes in it. And it's only been lately that he's kind of realised that he should have kind of, blooded a few of those youngsters a bit earlier, probably.
Thing is, when someone like Erling Haaland, or when any player, I guess, comes out and says, that there is an issue with motivation or with hunger, he's got someone in mind. Now, he's never going to say who it is, but he's clearly got 1, 2, 3, maybe more players in mind. So is that dressing room broken? Is there an issue there that, we've seen when Pep's fallen out with a player in the past, he's been very quick to move them on. I mean, are we facing a situation where he's got to pick his battles here and maybe get a number of them out this summer?
I think there's a bit of uncertainty, and I don't think that's helped just in the season in general. I mean, Kyle Walker starts the season as club captain, and by January he's gone, he's out of the team, and then he has to go. You've got the whole issue with De Bruyne and his contract. They start contract talks with De Bruyne in September, he gets injured, they go on the back burner, he comes back, there's no talks, he gets sort of March time and he's thinking, well, I'm going to have to move, I really want to stay. But he's getting moved on by the club, then he kind of comes back, plays really well, and people are starting to talk about maybe possible use. I mean, all of these little kind of things just haven't helped City and haven't helped Pep. And then you've got issues beyond that with the likes of Gundogan. I mean, Gundogan hasn't had a great season. I think City just assumed that he would come back from Barcelona and slot straight back in. And for whatever reason, it took him 6 months to get up to speed. Bernardo Silva just hasn't looked like the same player in terms of, his energy and the distances he covers sort of on the pitch. So there's all these little issues that now you're going to have to solve in the summer, and it's going to be tricky because essentially you're breaking up a dressing room that's been together for 7, 8 years. It's really, really tough to start saying, well, you guys aren't going to do it for us anymore.
There's also big players in the dressing room, popular players in the dressing room that Pep hasn't handled very well this year. Jack Grealish, Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne. These are players that are the glue of that dressing room, aren't they? They're the senior guys that have always kind of delivered when City's been big. There's been a problem with Ederson from, 18 months ago? Ederson wanted to go last summer. Wanted to go last summer, didn't go, and he's not been happy all season. So there's a lot of players now, a lot of Pep's big players, who've got their own reasons to be unhappy. Foden has had a terrible season. It's not been managed particularly well by Pep, I don't think, this year. Grealish has been, I feel sorry for Grealish. I think Grealish has been crushed by Pep. That when Jack Grealish signed for Man City, he had a great couple of years initially, but he was a flair player, would take people on, he gave that kind of X factor to City. He's turned into a robot now. And you can see when Grealish plays, the very rare times that he does play, he's almost like inhibited by, he's looking over his shoulder, what will Pep say if I try and take this man on? So I think Pep over time, I'm told that he's a very hard manager to play for. Yes, he'll win trophies, but he's so demanding that it can be quite tiring for players. All these players have they've won everything under Pep, so they are now experienced enough and mature enough to actually say, well, hang on a minute, to push back in many ways, or to think, I'm not going to run through that brick wall again because I've done it so many times and I get nothing for it. So I just think it's a general, not malaise. I mean, Pep's still Pep, but I think not enough people are looking at Pep. They're looking at the players, but Pep is the guy that gets all the praise when they win. So maybe he deserves a bit more scrutiny when they don't win, because the genius that he is, when things go wrong for Pep's teams in seasons that we've seen in the past, they tend to go wrong quite badly.
All right, well, given all that, are they still favourites in the FA Cup final on Saturday, or are they still a team that can put all of that to one side when there's a prize in view?
2 months ago, I'd have said no, they weren't favourites, but I think they've kind of rediscovered a little bit of their form over the last sort of, since the March international break, really. They've looked more stable. I know some of the results haven't been great, but they've gone 10 unbeaten.
Without Haaland, they've looked a better team in terms of the way they play, they're more fluid.
Well, I was just about to say, I mentioned there how Pep started to play that box midfield with 4 midfielders and then kind of these split strikers. You can't do that with Erling Haaland, really. He's done it with Marmoush on one side and Savinho on the other. Now, you can't not play Haaland because he's your main goal scorer, so he has to start at Wembley. But there will be a part of Pep, I imagine, who thinks, well, the way that we've got back on track is to get more control of games. The way I've done that is to have these 4 midfielders with no centre forward, essentially. So is there a case to not start with Haaland against Palace? Now, that's a massive call in a massive game, in a game really you have to win, because obviously the FA Cup puts a different spin on the entire season. It would be a massive call, but I imagine there's part of Pep that thinks, no, I quite like to play my 4 midfielders still and split strikers and have a bit more control, particularly with the way that Palace play. Who are just going to want to play on the break all the time.
That would be a huge call. Haaland wasn't good against Southampton. The worst team in the Premier League with a terrible defence. He barely had a kick. But to drop Erling Haaland after giving him... That is...
I don't think he will, but it's a possibility, certainly. I don't think it's a dead cert that he starts on Saturday at Wembley.
I think we should take a moment to talk about Oliver Glasner, the job he's done at Palace, and just how good they are. I remember I saw him the other week before the semi-final when they played at Arsenal, and everybody saw they're going to roll over here 3 or 4 because the big game at Wembley was on the horizon. They were the better team. And they rested several players. But they look. We've talked about Ruben Amorim struggling with a sort of 3-4-2-1, 3-4-3 system. This is a team that's doing it in the Premier League week in, week out. Obviously, they've had longer to work on it. But, how much of a surprise have they been this season for you?
They started the season quite slow, didn't they, Palace? They had a tricky start, but they've been outstanding, and I've seen them a few times, and they are a really good team to watch. And you asked before who's the favourites. I think City are the favourites, but I think Palace will win. I just think Palace have got the energy, the belief, the ambition to take City on. I don't think they're frightened of City. I think that, and people like Eberechi Eze is probably the best player in the league in the last month, hasn't he? He's a sensational player. Mateta's looked great forward up front as well. I think Palace have got the game, and also Glasner's a big game manager. He won the Europa League with Eintracht Frankfurt 3 years ago against Rangers. He knows what it takes, and a lot of people are talking about what will Tottenham do if Ange goes, and they're talking about Iraola. I think Oliver Glasner's a much better bet. I think Glasner's got all the credentials to take on a top club like Tottenham. But if he wins the FA Cup with Crystal Palace, you might think that Palace is a better bet. But Palace is a very good manager, Glasner.
I was at that semi-final against Villa, and Villa had obviously just come off the back of that Champions League again against PSG, where they got the better of them really at Villa Park for the majority of that game. And Palace were absolutely unbelievable. They absolutely battered Villa, and it could have been about 6-0. Eze was terrific. Wharton in midfield, he's unbelievable for a midfielder of his age.
Great at the back. They've got a very good spine, haven't they?
They're organised, like they're compact when they defend. They know exactly what they're doing on the break. They play. They're not embarrassed about playing in transition. The way they move, the runs that they make when the ball breaks. It's just everything is so organised. And Glasnow's just he just feels like he's this really calming influence on the touchline. And even he comes into his press conference afterwards, and obviously, getting Palace to an FA Cup final is massive. I know they've done it in 1990 and 2016, but to get a club like Palace to an FA Cup final is huge. And there was no kind of, I don't know, he just sat there and he looked so calm as if it was just normal. And I just thought, it's incredible that for a manager to come to the Premier League and to perform as he has done with a team like that.
I think they'll win it because I just got a feeling it's their time. I think they've had 2 cup finals in the past where they've lost, on both occasions, really unluckily to Man United. I think this time, I just think they've got the better team now, Palace, than they've had before. I think the fans as well. The fans will want it. It sounds ridiculous, the fans will want it more than Man City fans. I think the Man City fans, it's just another game, another possible silverware to a bad season. I think the Palace fans are so desperate, they will make it an occasion. I just think Palace have got the momentum for this.
You're both going to be there at Wembley. What are your favourite FA Cup memories? FA Cup final memories, I should say.
The one that sticks out, it's another City one, is when they were beaten by Wigan. Because I've never known a day that appeared to be so one-sided and then was so one-sided the other way. I can remember being in the car on the way to Wembley and listening to the radio, and they were interviewing Wigan fans outside, and I can remember one Wigan fan saying, I hope it's not 8-0. I hope we don't lose 8-0. Anything other than 8-0, that'll be fine. I'll take 5-0. And I thought, that's a really weird way to approach a final, but I can kind of understand it because you're about to get relegated from the Premier League. And then when the game started, it wasn't a smash and grab. They just absolutely battered City. McManaman just running all over Pablo Zabaleta, and then the goal when it came was almost like it was meant to happen. It was just such a strange day, and obviously did for Mancini in the end.
I've got a story about that day. You might know this one, Rob, but this isn't my favourite memory. I'll come to that in a minute. But basically, Roberto Mancini was 24 hours from being sacked by Man City. I mean, we all knew on the day of the game he was being sacked. And by that point, his relationship with everyone at the club had just gone absolutely through the floor. He was probably the most unpopular manager of any club I've ever dealt with. I mean, I love Mancini. I thought it was great. It was great for us, but the people that worked at the club just couldn't stand him. And if you remember that day, it rained all day. And City lost, and Mancini had been on the touchline all day in his raincoat. So before he went to his media press conference, he basically told one of his staff to get the hairdryer out to dry his coat. They were drying his coat in the dressing room before he came to do the press conference. Did his press conference, went to a little side room and then obliterated one of his staff. Just horrendous dressing down in front of the media. And then he went, and the next day was Fergie's last game at Old Trafford, and on the way up to drive to Old Trafford, Mancini was sacked. It was a busy day. Fergie quits and Mancini gets sacked. But my memory of the FA Cup final, so this is kind of giving my age away a little bit here. My first FA Cup final at work was 95, Man United v Everton. I was just a young kid at the time, and Wembley in those days was a different scenario to now, because obviously we've done games at Wembley or big games, and you basically, your access these days is so limited. You basically go to the press box, you go to the press room, and you don't really get much access. But back then it was, after the game, you had to, this was when the old dressing rooms were in the tunnel area behind the pitch, so you had to basically walk from the press box down to the tunnel. And I remember I walked down the main stand at Wembley onto the dirt track, and I was able to walk onto the pitch. So I'm walking on the pitch at Wembley. I'm actually in the 6-yard box where Paul Rideout scored the goal, and I'm thinking, thinking this is where Jeff Hurst scored the goal that won England the World Cup back in '66. And I'm thinking, I'm stood on the pitch at Wembley in the goal mouth, and I carried on walking down the tunnel, and I'm walking down the tunnel waiting for the players to come out. Eric Cantona stood outside the door because he was suspended at the time, so he couldn't play in the final. He was stood there with a face like thunder. I was a bit kind of intimidated by it a little bit, thinking I can't go too close to Eric. But it was thinking how much more accessible the game was back in those days, that you could actually walk on the pitch at Wembley and then walk down the tunnel and basically...
I've actually scored a hat-trick at Wembley for that very reason. After an autoglass windscreen final that Stockport lost, my dad was club doctor, and one of the players had broken his arm in the second half and had to go to hospital. And he was meant to take me to the team hotel afterwards, and they made me wait on the benches at Wembley for him to come back. And to pass the time, the kit man gave me a ball and said, just go and kick it about on the pitch. So I became the youngest ever person to score a hat-trick at Wembley.
How old were you?
About 8.
Wow.
A record that will never be beaten. presumably.
But the cup final is a great day. I mean, obviously you've been plenty of cup fans as well. What's
Yeah,
stands out for you?
well, just in terms of access, I guess the one that's sort of will always stick in my mind is it was the COVID year, because it was just never has the distance been so great between the sense of occasion and the actual atmosphere in the stadium. You know, I mean, as you talk about, you know, the distance that we have with the executives and the players and everything else, and on that day we were walking in. I remember walking in with Arsenal's chief executive to the ground. All right, cup final,
Got your mask on.
Yeah, masks, distance, 2 meters, please stay away. And there were only, I think, I can't remember exactly, I think there was only sort of 30 odd media allowed in. And then obviously the the two squads and the support staff and everybody. And Aubameyang scores what turns out to be the winning goal. And you just sort of automatically think there's going to be this big Wembley roar, and it's just sort of 40 odd people going, way. It's just it was such a surreal day, because, and then they go and get the FA Cup, and you're like, wow, how are they getting the FA Cup when this is just a game being played in, admittedly, a very nice, but basically a park game with no one there. It's just a surreal thing.
Just one not to Palace. Were you there in 2016 when Alan Pardew did his dance?
I was.
That was a memory I'll never forget. But hopefully Crystal Palace fans will have a happier day this weekend.
On the dance floor?
Yeah. Maybe Oliver Glasner.
I'm not letting you get out of this.
Maybe Oliver Glasner will be doing it at the weekend in front of Pep Guardiola. We'll see.
Well, we can watch whether Oliver Glasner does the Pardew dance or not at Wembley this weekend. You can, of course, watch it live on ESPN Plus if you're in the US. That's all from us this week. Thanks. See you soon.